Have you ever wondered
exist.
who are the last people to see a body before it vanishes beneath the cold earth? Who digs the graves in the silence of the night? Who talks to the dead when everyone else has left? Today, you'll meet the Gravediggers, the true guardians of the boundary between our world and what lies beneath it. But beware, not everything buried stays silent. Not every body accepts eternal rest. What you're about to hear aren't urban legends. These are true accounts, straight from the mouths of men who've worked in cemeteries across the United States. Old places, cursed grounds, forgotten by God. Each story carries the testimony of a gravedigger who saw what no other living soul should have seen. They buried more than corpses. They buried truths, screams, and horrors that defy reason. In New York, a grave began ringing with a bell from beyond. In Washington, a veiled woman appears every night. In Kansas, disturbed indigenous spirits cry out for vengeance. And in Alaska, something frozen is trying to dig its way out. Do you still think cemeteries are just quiet, sad places? Buckle up, turn off the lights, and prepare to hear the secrets of the men who dig graves and are haunted by what they unearthed. If you have the courage, watch until the end and tell me, would you still have the guts to work alone among the dead? Like this video, share it with someone who wouldn't believe these stories, and subscribe to the channel, because after today, you'll never look at a cemetery the same way again. New York never sleeps, but the dead do. At least that's what I used to tell myself as I wandered the cold, deserted corridors of Woodlawn Cemetery, nestled in the heart of the Bronx, surrounded by crowded neighborhoods and busy streets. That place felt frozen in time, a pocket of silence and darkness in the middle of the city that never stops. But that night, something down there woke up, something that never should have. It was my 12th year as the night gravedigger, alone. No supervisor, no co-workers, just me, my flashlight, my shovel, and the dead. In the beginning, it was hard to sleep after my shift, not because of the bodies, but because of the sounds. Sounds that made no sense. Footsteps coming from nowhere, chains dragging across the stone, whistling that seemed to float between the graves. Sounds I eventually learned to ignore, until that night. It was cold, but not normal cold. It was the kind of cold that sticks to your bones, like it's crawling up from the earth itself. As I walked through the north section, where the oldest graves are, and some from the 1800s, I noticed the silence had changed. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It felt like everything had been swallowed, like the very air was being sucked away by something unseen. That's when I heard the bell, a soft, metallic, insistent ring, echoing from somewhere inside the fog. It seemed impossible. Burial bells, a 19th century tradition to prevent premature burials, had been removed decades ago, all of them. And even if one remained, it shouldn't ring. Not like this. Not with that hypnotic intensity. I followed the sound like a man walking off a cliff. My boots sank into damp ground, my heart pounding louder with every step. Each footfall brought me deeper into a part of the cemetery I was certain didn't exist on any internal map. Not until I found it, Grave 74. The tombstone was limestone, eroded and cracked. No name, no date, no flowers. But the bell, it was there. A rusted iron frame held a thin chain, and an old bell swaying gently with no wind. Ringing, calling. My flashlight began to flicker. It stuttered, and for a brief moment, I swear I saw someone crouched next to the grave, a silhouette, a shadow. When the light returned, nothing was there. I stepped closer and noticed something that made my stomach drop. The soil around the grave looked freshly disturbed, like it had just been dug. But I had inspected that area 2 days earlier, and at that time, there was no Grave 74. I knelt down, touched the earth. It was warm. I looked up, and then I heard a voice from inside the grave, a weak, male voice, whispering with desperation, "Please, I'm still here." And then, the bell stopped. The next morning, I took one of the cemetery's internal maps and headed back to the northern section, determined to prove to myself it had all been a mistake, maybe a clerical error, a misplaced record, or a forgotten renovation. I'd seen strange things before, hallucinations caused by exhaustion, even elaborate pranks pulled by teenagers. But grave 74, that grave wasn't listed anywhere in the official documents. It simply didn't exist. I returned to the spot. The dawn fog still clung to the headstones like smoke trying to hide something. And there it was, exactly as the night before. The cracked tombstone, nameless, the dark soil still damp, and that damned bell, now motionless, but perfectly intact, as if it was waiting. I knelt carefully and touched the iron structure of the bell. It was warm, not lukewarm, hot, as if it had just come out of a furnace. And then, in that moment, a metallic snap echoed from inside the bell, a dry, artificial sound, like someone was pulling the string from beneath the earth. My breathing shortened, my chest tightened, and that's when I realized it wasn't just the bell, it was the air around it. It felt heavier, like I had stepped across some unseen threshold, like walking into a room where something horrific happened. Even if no one speaks of it, the space remembers, the ground keeps it. I took my master key and unlocked the nearby tool shed. Inside, I grabbed the burial ledger. I sat on a stone bench and began flipping through the yellowed pages, covered in long-forgotten names and dates. No number 74, no nameless headstone, no mention of a bell being installed in the last 50 years. But then, between some stuck pages, I found a loose sheet, thin paper, nearly transparent, handwritten. Just one sentence in trembling, uneven script. The bell rings for those who haven't accepted the soil. My hands began to shake. I looked back at the tombstone, now overwhelmed by a feeling of presence. This was not an ordinary grave. It wasn't a mistake. It was a summons, and I had answered. That night, I returned with a clear goal, to prove once and for all that this grave was never meant to exist. I brought a printed copy of the latest update from our digital burial registry. I checked one by one every grave in the north section. The numbering jumped from 73 straight to 75. There was no 74. There never had been. And yet, there it was. Physical, present, tangible. I began to suspect I was being manipulated, by my own mind or by something far worse. I contacted the municipal archives. I requested access to the original maps from 1890, when that section of the cemetery was first laid out. The response was swift and unsettling. The north section was only officially opened in 1903. No burials prior to that date. Impossible. The tombstone was there, visibly weathered by time. The style of the carving, the type of stone, everything pointed to something from the late 1800s, but none of it appeared in the records. It was as if that grave had been erased from history or inserted after it. Night fell, and with it came a strange sense of déjà vu. Every shadow felt heavier, every sound more distant. When I returned to the grave, I brought a tape measure to document its exact physical dimensions. I took photos, logged measurements, recorded everything with obsessive precision. But when I got back to my little office, an old container behind the main tool shed, all of the images of the grave were missing from the camera. In their place, corrupted files, static, as if the lens itself refused to capture what stood there, as if that space didn't belong to our world. I flipped through my notes in panic, and that's when I noticed something even more absurd. On the printed floor plan of the cemetery, grave 74 had appeared. Yes, it was there, same paper, same ink, same. But now, between plots 73 and 75, it stood as if it had always been part of the map. The only difference was the name, a name I will never forget, Noah W. Ellison. And the most terrifying part, that's my full name. Digging up a grave isn't just cutting into dirt. It's slicing through layers of silence, through untold stories, through secrets pressed down by the weight of centuries. And when you dig up something that was never meant to be unearthed, the ground reacts, it resists, it screams without sound. I returned to grave 74 with a shovel, thick gloves, and a decision burning in my chest. I had to see what was buried there, because somehow, in a way I couldn't yet explain, it was connected to me, to my name, to my very existence. The bell no longer rang, but the air around it was strange, as if vibrating with its own hidden frequency. The leaves surrounding the grave were dead, brittle, grey like ashes. I started digging. Every strike of the shovel echoed like muffled thunder. The soil was darker than normal, almost black, and it reeked of metal, rust and ancient flesh. My arms ached. The shovel kept slipping, but I didn't stop. Something was urging me on. Something was calling. After about 5 feet of digging, I hit something solid, a hollow thud. Wood, but it wasn't a normal coffin. It was old, yes, but wrapped in thick iron chains, rusted and tightly crossed over the lid, and carved into the wood were symbols. Symbols I didn't recognize, but that sent a chill crawling down my spine. Spirals, eyes, claws. When I touched the wood, I felt it vibrating, barely but unmistakably, like placing your hand on a wall behind which someone is breathing from the inside. Something was there, not dead, not fully alive. A crack along the coffin's side leaked a faint amber glow, like buried embers, and released a thick, sweet-smelling smoke. It rose slowly, touching my face, and then I saw things, flashes, a dark room, a tombstone with my name, me, lying down, looking up, while a faceless entity closed the lid of the coffin above me. And behind it, dozens of other graves, and all bearing my name. I stumbled back, gasping, covered in soil and sweat, but the worst part was when the bell rang again, on its own, no wind, no chord, just a summoning, and I was already inside the answer. I should have left that night. I should have left the grave open, the chains untouched, and prayed that the earth would go back to sleep. But something inside me, an ancient instinct, or a curse rooted in my name, wouldn't allow it. I stayed. Around 3:40 a.m., the bell rang for the third time, but this time it wasn't fragile. It was deep, continuous, like a funeral bell echoing from a bottomless pit. The trees trembled, as if they too could hear it. The air thickened. Time seemed to stop. The coffin lid began to move, slowly, stiffly. The chains didn't snap, but gave way with a dry pop, as if they'd been waiting for this moment all along. The amber light leaking from the cracks intensified, pulsing like a heart about to return to life. A thick vapor rose, covering everything around me until I could barely see my own feet. And then, from the depths of the grave, the voice came. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a scream. It was a prayer, low, filled with pain, spoken in a language I didn't know, yet understood perfectly. The voice called me, told me I had been buried before, that I had done this already, that my role wasn't to bury the dead, but to make sure they never got out. You sealed me, it said. You betrayed me. And now, you've descended. The visions returned. Tombstones with my name. Figures repeating my face. I wasn't the first. I was the last of myself. The ground beneath me gave way. I sank to my knees. I screamed. I struggled. But it was useless. Invisible hands, cold, soft, full of earth, pulled me down, held me tight, and the bell rang without pause. The last thing I saw before being swallowed by the heavy fog was that the tombstone had changed. Now it had a clear inscription. Here lies Noah W. Ellison, gravedigger, betrayer, eternal prisoner. The earth closed. The bell fell silent, and everything returned to stillness. But if you ever visit Woodlawn Cemetery on a cold yet quiet night, you might hear something in the distance, a bell ringing by itself, calling for the next. Washington is a city built on symbols, secrets, and ancient pacts. Among its wide avenues and towering monuments, there's a place most people forget, but one that never forgets anyone. the Congressional Cemetery. I started working there in 2017. I had just moved to DTC and needed silence. And what place is more silent than a cemetery? I accepted the night shift as a caretaker and preservation assistant, but unlike other cemeteries, this one wasn't just a field of tombstones. It was a sanctuary of unfinished memories. On my first night, I was instructed to make rounds inside the main mausoleum, an ancient stone building, adorned with marble columns and carvings of angels whose eyes had long been worn away by time. They said the ashes and remains of important American historical figures were kept there. Politicians, judges, priests, men of faith and power. The first thing I noticed was the smell, not of death. I was used to that. It was the smell of burned books, melted wax and very old rot, the kind of smell that sinks into your skin. Overhead, invisible leaks dripped water onto the marble, sounding like tears hitting the floor. That night, I noticed something strange. The mausoleum door was ajar, something strictly forbidden after hours. I entered with my flashlight. Its beam struggled to cut through the darkness, and there, at the far end of the circular room where the guest book was kept, I saw a name. The book was closed, locked inside a glass case, but on the surface of the glass, written in something that looked like wet soot, was the name Eleanor D. I looked around. Nothing. No sign of forced entry. No footprints. Just the distant, muffled hum of the city and a steady echo like someone breathing very close yet invisible. That night, something entered the mausoleum, and the most terrifying part, it never left. After that first night, a constant unease settled over me. It was as if something had been activated, as if just seeing the name Eleanor D. had broken an invisible seal that once kept the silence of the mausoleum intact. Every night after that, at the same time, 2:59 a.m., I was awakened by a sound, not loud, not threatening, but impossible to ignore. 3 soft knocks, always at 2:59. They came from inside the urn chamber, a narrow, circular gallery with darkened marble columns and dozens of niches bearing names long erased by time. It was the oldest part of the cemetery and the most devoid of life, yet full of attention. On the 4th night, I brought my camera. I set up the tripod, adjusted the focus, and left it recording, pointed toward the center of the room. The lighting was minimal, just 2 dim electric candles on opposite ends of the corridor. I stepped away and waited. 3 a.m. The clock chimed. 3 muffled knocks echoed, like fists against stone. I looked at the screen. The image trembled subtly, as if the camera itself sensed something in the air. And then she appeared. In the darkest corner of the screen, a figure, female, tall, wearing a black veil over her face. She didn't walk. She manifested, emerging between frames of silence as if time opened itself to let her through. I froze. The monitor showed the impossible, the veiled woman slowly approaching the center of the room, but the floor made no sound, no footsteps, no shadow. It was as if she didn't walk on reality. She drifted through it, and then she stopped, in front of an empty niche. On the glass, fogged by the cold of night, a mark slowly appeared, drawn by the fingertip of something invisible. I'm back. I ran to the room, threw the door open. Empty. The footage was gone, corrupted, but the writing on the glass was still there. The mausoleum's guest book was a historical artifact in its own right. Yellowed pages, leather cover, dates going back to the 1800s. It was kept locked under a glass dome, reinforced, with a single key that I kept in my office. No one accessed it, and yet the name kept appearing. The morning after the veiled woman's appearance, I checked the book on impulse. No tampering. The dome was untouched, but there it was, on the last line, written in dark ink, perfectly aligned with the handwriting of past visitors. Eleanor D., 3 a.m. I flipped through the previous pages. Nothing, then returned to the current date. The signature hadn't been there before. It had appeared sometime between closing the mausoleum and sunrise. Night after night, the pattern repeated, always at 3 a.m., always the same name, sometimes accompanied by a small symbol beside it, a flower, a number, a delicately drawn inverted cross. I recorded every occurrence, set up sensors, motion-activated cameras. Even when no one entered, even when the door never opened, the signature appeared, again and again. Eleanor D. I started digging into history, searched the cemetery archives, and found something that chilled me to the bone. Eleanor Duval, born in 1847, died in 1891. She was the wife of a prominent senator, buried with honor, but later exhumed by court order, posthumously accused of witchcraft, a scandal quietly suppressed, never officially recorded. Her body was cremated, and her ashes divided into 3 urns. One of them, according to old notes, mysteriously vanished from the mausoleum in 1902. That urn, could it be the one meant for the empty niche where the veiled woman always stood? I no longer knew what was real, but every night the name was there. Eleanor D. Signing, claiming, returning. The next night I did something I never should have done. I waited for her. I set up thermal cameras, brought motion sensors. I locked myself inside the mausoleum at 2:30 a.m. with flashlights, a voice recorder, and the old guest book closed beside me. When the clock struck 3, the cold dropped instantly. Not in the air, inside me. It was as if time itself had frozen in my chest. The electric candles flickered. The hallway went dark for a second that lasted too long, and then she appeared. She didn't emerge from behind a column. She didn't enter through a door. She was just there, in the center of the room, as if she had always been, tall, still, wearing a black mourning dress from another century, fabric without shine, a thick veil covering her face. But the veil wasn't ordinary cloth, it was something alive. It pulsed gently, as if breathing for her. I should have run, but I couldn't. She looked at me without eyes. Slowly, she raised her hand, thin, long, fingers nearly skeletal, and she pointed into the empty niche, the same one where the inscription had appeared days ago. The room trembled slightly. The sounds around me weren't coming from outside. They came from the walls, like whispers trapped inside the stone, all repeating the same name, Eleanor, Eleanor, Eleanor. She stepped forward. The cold deepened. My flashlight burst in sparks. The camera froze. The voice recorder melted. And then, something even more terrifying happened. She spoke, not with a voice, but with everything around me. The floor, the air, the glass, the marble, all vibrated with a phrase that wasn't said, but felt. You have something that belongs to me. I dropped to my knees, started trembling, and I understood. The missing urn, the third one. It had been with me all along. I ran, or at least, I tried. That night, after she spoke at or felt through me, I grabbed the box containing the forgotten urn and bolted from the mausoleum. But when I reached the door, I noticed something strange. The streetlights, which usually filtered through the gates of the cemetery, were gone. Everything outside was fog, a thick, heavy fog, completely silent. My footsteps echoed back with a strange delay, as if I were walking inside an echo or inside a tomb. I went back, tried calling someone. No signal, no response. The clock read 3:07 a.m. and kept reading 3:07 a.m. forever. I walked along the outer cemetery path, trying to reach the walls, but with every step, I ended up back at the same place, the entrance to the mausoleum. That's when I understood. I was no longer outside, nor inside. The cemetery had swallowed me. I returned to the main chamber, the guest book wide open on the pedestal, the pages turned on their own, as if blown by a wind that existed only inside. I stopped at the last page, and there it was, the signature, Eleanor D. But now, just below it, another one, N. Ellison 3:07 a.m. My name, my time, The mausoleum had recorded me, just as it had with all the others who entered and never left. I felt her presence behind me. But this time, I didn't feel fear. I felt resignation. I had become what so many before me had been, a living memory trapped in the stone of this place. And if you ever visit the Congressional Cemetery, can't you hear a voice echoing between the tombs, or see a signature that wasn't there before? It might be me trying to get out, or maybe just asking for company. The soil there was different, not just darker, damper, quieter. It felt like every grain of earth was watching, as if the land itself had eyes. When I was offered a temporary restoration job at the Wyandot National Burying Ground, I thought it would be another simple task: cleanup, leveling, installing name plaques on forgotten graves. It was a cultural preservation project, officially respectful, ceremonial even. But the feeling I got when I first stepped onto that ground was of trespass. The trees, old and twisted, seemed to grow inward, as if protecting something. There was no wind, no sound, just a dense, ritualistic silence, the kind that precedes a prayer or a sentence. I was assigned to the western section, where, according to records, members of the Wyandot Nation were buried, many of them exiled and killed during the forced relocation in 1843. Some graves were marked with tribal symbols, others with nothing but stones. A few had been desecrated decades ago during construction projects that were never completed. That first night, I slept in a trailer within the cemetery. Around 2 a.m., I woke to a sound I can't explain. A drumbeat, rhythmic, distant, but completely real. I got up and looked out the window, and then I saw, in the middle of the cemetery, crouched on the ground surrounded by scorched leaves, a figure wearing a dark red cloak. It didn't move, didn't look at me, but it made me feel as if I was being measured, weighed, judged. I blinked. It was gone. The next morning, I walked to the spot where I'd seen the figure. There, buried just beneath the surface, I found a small leather pouch stained with dried blood. Inside were 3 human teeth and a fragment of bone etched with tribal markings. Tied to the pouch was a strip of worn leather with a single word in the Wyandot language, Etaskara, that which returns. The earth there did not want to be touched, and I had already made the first wound. The next morning, I tried to return to routine, or at least I tried. The project supervisors had asked me to clear a small strip of land to install new memorial plaques. It was a delicate task, removing only the top layer of soil, avoiding any graves. I started carefully, gloves on, mask, scraping millimeter by millimeter, but something felt wrong. With every scoop, fragments of bone began to emerge. Small, porous, human. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Maybe displaced remains, poorly catalogued. But as I progressed, I noticed a pattern. The bones were always coming back to the surface. I would collect them, bury them respectfully in another section, as instructed, and the next morning, they were back, in the exact same place. So I decided to mark one, a metacarpal with faint engravings, almost invisible. I buried it beneath 20 centimeters of soil, pinned it with a stone, photographed it, and covered it. Hours later, I returned. The stone was still there, the soil untouched, but the bone was on the surface again, as if pushed back up. I looked around. No one, no footprints, no signs of animals, just still trees and a slow breeze that seemed to pass through me, not around me. That night, I dreamed of voices, broken phrases in a language I didn't understand, but one word repeated over and over, Etaskara. And in the dream, I was underground, not dead, just buried, surrounded by hundreds of bones, all of them watching me. The next morning, the cemetery felt altered. The trees stood in slightly different positions. The air was heavier. The shovel I had left stuck in the ground was now snapped in half, and beside the pit I had dug the day before, someone or something had left a message written in ash. They don't want to sleep. I needed help. After that second night, the bones, the message in ash, the dream, I could no longer pretend it was coincidence. The roots, the fragments, the wind inside my skin, everything screamed for meaning, and I knew where to find it. I sought out one of the few direct descendants of the Wyandot Nation still living near the cemetery, Owen Teohakwa, a quiet elder known by some as the Keeper of Broken Prayers. I showed up at his house at 6 a.m. unannounced. Before I could say a word, he looked into my eyes and said, "You've brought back what was sealed. The land has heard you." I told him everything. The drum, the hooded figure, the bones, the dreams. He listened in silence, fingers moving over a necklace made of feathers and pieces of black stone. When I finished, he stood slowly and opened an old wooden chest. From it, he took a small clay bowl, a hawk feather, and a handful of dark earth wrapped in red cloth. This was offering soil, taken from the center of the circle in 1902. The ritual was interrupted by force. The third mark was never completed. He explained that the cemetery wasn't just sacred ground. It was a gateway between worlds. The graves of the exiled formed a spiritual circle, and an ancient three-part ritual was performed to ensure each soul's spirit would not return in pain. The last part of the ritual was broken when the bones were moved without permission, and by digging there I had broken the final seal. "What's coming back now isn't just spirit," he said. "It's the roots of the earth, memories that refuse to be forgotten, and you're part of the soil now too." He refused to go near the cemetery, said that no living shaman could stop what had begun, but before sending me away, he placed something in my hand, a small, old mirror with inscriptions carved around the edges. "When they come to claim your reflection, it will already be too late." I left feeling like something was already walking behind me, and when I returned to the cemetery, the trees had changed positions, and in the mirror, my eyes were no longer mine. I returned to the cemetery determined to end it. I carried the mirror, the ceremonial soil, and a fear that burned like fever. But before I even reached the center of the grounds, I felt that my body had changed. Walking became uncomfortable. My muscles felt stiff. Each step echoed from deep within my chest. When I looked at myself in the mirror, something was wrong. My skin was cracking. Tiny fissures along my arms, as if small roots were growing from the inside out. They didn't hurt, but they pulsed. They moved. With each heartbeat, I felt something pushing beneath the skin, as if the earth inside me was germinating. I tried scraping it off, washing, tearing, but it returned, stronger, deeper. That night, I dreamed again, but this time, it wasn't bones, it was me. I was buried, not as a body, but as a seed. And above me, a tree grew, made of flesh, eyes, and bones. And from each branch hung names I had erased from the cemetery, names meant to be remembered, names that I, as the caretaker, had forgotten. I awoke with the taste of soil in my mouth. On my bed, there were wet footprints of mud, but the mud came from inside my throat. I stumbled to my feet. The mirror was cracked, and in the crack, something moved, a root, inside the glass. As if the reflection wanted to sprout, I ran to the cemetery. The trees were now arranged in a circle, as if waiting. At the center, the hole I had dug days ago, now alive, breathing. And as I approached, it called my name, with a voice like dry leaves, with the scent of buried childhood. At the center of the circle, the pit breathed like an ancient lung. I felt the soil calling, not with words, but with memory. Slowly, I knelt at the edge of the living grave. The mirror trembled in my hands, and inside it, the reflection was no longer me. It was a buried version of myself, covered in moss, eyes bleeding sap. Behind that reflection, human shapes loomed, ancient, forgotten, wronged, the exiled ones. They didn't want revenge. They wanted presence. They wanted remembrance, and I, the last gravedigger to touch their defiled graves, would be the final seal, the missing offering. With bare hands, I began to dig inside the pit, but the earth did not resist. It welcomed me. Slowly, I lay down over the breathing soil, the roots wrapped around my body like a mother's arms. And for the first time, the drum, that old drum that woke me on the first night, resounded inside my chest. Thump, thump, thump. The mirror slipped from my hand, falling beside me. In it, I saw the last image, my eyes closing, but the reflection still watching me. The earth covered me with ceremonial slowness, branch by branch, leaf by leaf, name by name. And when the hole finally closed, the circle of trees bowed in silence. They say that from time to time, under the full moon, a new tree appears at the center of the Wyandot Burying Ground. It grows fast. Its bark bears ancient markings, and its shadow looks like someone standing there watching you. Silence in Alaska is not like the silence of a forest or a church. It's older, heavier. It's the kind of silence that feels like it's hiding a sound that should never be heard. My name is Elias, and for more than 12 years, I was the solitary grave digger of a small cemetery in Nome, Alaska, a remote village where winter seems to last the entire year and the sun only shows up to remind you that time still exists. I handled everything alone. I dug graves with a pickaxe, kept the death records, cleared the snow from the headstones, and kept the chapel warm for the rare visitor. The last burial had been nearly 2 years ago, but I was never alone. Not really. It all started with the grave of the Gregorov family, 3 bodies, buried side by side after an avalanche in 1932. The snow covered those graves more insistently than the others, no matter how often I cleared it. The next morning, the snow was back, thicker, heavier. One morning, I found the 3 wooden crosses broken, ripped from the ground and stacked neatly at the chapel door. I assumed it was vandalism, but there was no one there. There was no way it could have been someone. Then, the whispers began. In the late afternoon, when the sun bled across the horizon, the wind passed through the cemetery like a blade, and with it came a voice. Not a human voice. It was as if the ice itself spoke, and it always said the same thing. Below, we still hear. The first night, I tried to ignore it. The second, I locked myself inside the chapel with the fire burning. By the third, I dreamed of the Gregorovs sitting around the fireplace, staring at me silently. They didn't smile. They just watched me, as if waiting. I woke up drenched in sweat, despite the 18-degree-C cold. And the next morning, what awaited me outside wasn't snow. It was a freshly dug grave. No name, no cross. The shovel still stuck in the ice. And beside it, something impossible. My own wedding ring, buried there. Even though I had lost it over 20 years ago, the chapel had always been my refuge. Built from thick pine and old stone, it stood strong against snow, time, and solitude. It had a large fireplace, time-worn pews, and a small altar with a wrought iron crucifix. Even on 30-degree-C nights, the fire was always enough. But that week, the warmth wouldn't stay. I fed the fireplace everything I had. Dry wood, oil, pieces of old furniture. The flames grew, but didn't heat. The cold came from the floor. It rose through the benches, it crept up the walls, and it invaded the mattress where I slept. One night I woke up shivering, my teeth chattering and my bones aching as if they were cracking. The fire was still burning, but my breath came out in thick vapor like ice breaking. When I looked at the altar, the crucifix was covered in frost, not snow, frost from the inside, as if it had frozen from within the iron. Thin cracks began to appear along the chapel walls. Not just cracks, but something more. They were letters, words in Russian, carved as if by something sharp, fingernails. I translated them later. The phrase read, "We are still listening." That same night, I heard footsteps outside the chapel, not heavy, light, steady, like a child's, or someone used to the snow. I waited, breathed slowly. I didn't open the door. But when morning came, the snow around the chapel was stamped in a perfect circle, as if something had walked around me all night, and hanging from a frozen strand of hair on the door was my gravedigger ID badge, but with one word scratched out and another written in dried blood. Gravedigger scratched out, groom written in its place. I started hearing my name, not aloud, but in the crackle of ice, the creaking wood, the sound of wind moving through the chapel. Elias, always drawn out, always whispered as if a forgotten name was trying to remember itself. In an attempt to escape madness, I searched through the cemetery's old archives. I found the Grigorov records. I found maps, minutes, even handwritten notes from previous gravediggers. But there was one box, locked, unmarked, the key hidden beneath a stone at the altar. Inside were only a faded photograph and a letter. The photo showed a group standing in front of the chapel. I recognized the Gregorovs. I recognized the old priest. But what froze my blood was seeing myself, younger, short hair, clean-shaven, no wrinkles, no beard. On the back of the photo, someone had written in faded ink, "The groom of the snow must return to her." The letter, written in firm handwriting, read, "To Elias, child of the dawn, your blood was sealed in ice on the day of the forgotten vow. Do not bury what longs to be remembered. Do not deny what you promised beneath the snow." I was never there in 1932. That was impossible. But what if time here works differently? What if the ice preserves everything, even mistakes, in the same eternal winter? My hands trembled. I turned to the cracked mirror in the chapel. I looked at myself, and in that moment, I remembered. The makeshift altar beneath a blizzard, the I do spoken with lips blue from cold, the wedding ring lost, buried as a broken vow. The bride, she never rested, and now she was calling. The next night, the snow stopped. For the first time in weeks, the sky cleared, but it wasn't relief. It was a summons. I left the chapel, drawn by the sound of bells, but there was no wind. And those bells hadn't existed here in decades. In the middle of the cemetery, between the tombstones, a white figure stood waiting, a wedding dress. Frozen lace, torn veil, eyes black as a bottomless well. She didn't move. She only watched me, as if she had never stopped. I took a step. The ground groaned beneath my feet. Another step, and I began to hear her breathing, not with my ears but through my skin. Every pore could feel the cold breathing back into me. I remembered the day of the vow, the snow covering everything, the kiss without warmth, the promise never fulfilled. And then she reached out her hand. It wasn't an invitation, it was a reminder. "You left me waiting." The voice didn't come from her mouth. It came from the ice, the trees, the earth, as if the entire world spoke for her. I knelt before her, not out of fear, but out of memory. She stepped closer. Her footsteps left no marks. Her veil fluttered without wind. And the moment she touched my face, and I saw everything again. The altar, the vow, the death, the abandonment. She died waiting for me, and now I would see her forever. There were no words, no blessing, no music. The snow fell again, but now in reverent silence, like a church veil. She extended her hand a second time, and I accepted it. The ring, the one I found in the nameless grave, was now on my finger, and it fit perfectly. She led me to the altar, not the one in the chapel, the other, the cracked headstone where the Gregorovs were buried. At its center, an open grave yawned, deep, glowing softly with a blue light from within the earth. The bride stopped, looked at me, and said for the first time with her own lips, "You remember now." Yes, I remembered. I remembered promising I would return, leaving her there, alone, to flee the fate that had been forced on us. I remembered the last time I held her hand, cold, just like now. So I descended, one step at a time, feeling the snow melt beneath my feet and freeze again immediately after. Below, everything was white, silent. Still, she followed, and together before what remained of our past, we knelt. The snow covered us, and this time, I stayed. Some locals say that on bitter cold nights, two figures dance in the middle of the gnome cemetery, one in a wedding dress, the other with a ring gleaming beneath the moon, and around them the snow never touches the ground. What you've just heard, these aren't just stories. They are warnings. Warnings whispered between sealed coffins, between forgotten crosses, between layers of soil that hide more than bodies. These gravediggers weren't just caretakers of the dead. They were gateways. Gateways opened between our world and what lies beyond it. And once you peek through that crack, you never come back untouched. Still hearing their names in your mind, because they might be listening for yours. If this story chilled your soul, if something still watches you from behind the door, click the pinned comment below. There you'll find our exclusive ebook, filled with even deeper, more forbidden, more disturbing accounts, stories we couldn't publish on the channel. But be warned, some pages don't want to be read.